Capcom.
The Capcom Collection is Capcom's attempt at throwing itself a party, celebrating 35 years of Capcom fighters. While the collection has a lot to offer, stick around to hear our biggest criticism, and find out why one of the titles made us want to spinning pile drive our controller right into the ground. So, the Capcom Fighting Collection is a collection consisting of 10 fighting titles from Capcom. These include Hyper Street Fighter 2 Anniversary Edition, Darkstalkers, Puzzle Fighter, and more. When it comes to library, there's a familiarity with the library that will vary from person to person. Familiar classics are there for me, such as Street Fighter 2, Darkstalkers, and Puzzle Fighter. Titles I'd never heard of are there as well though, like Cyberbots, some of the Darkstalker related games, and games like Red Earth. Now there's pros and cons of unknown games, because on one hand there's something new for you to experience and explore, and then on the other hand you don't have that same connection to the old games that you did, so there's no nostalgia and there's no care for them. Many of the games have English and Japanese versions. Each game also has local and online multiplayer. There's multiple screen modes and so on for changing the screen to look like arcade screens. It adds interlacing and things like that. They're actually very cool. I like them quite a lot. They add quite a lot of quite a good feeling to the game and the visual style. Each game also allows you to jump in with a training mode where you can see your inputs and you can test the game out and so on. It would have been nicer to maybe have a bit more of a guide on each game, especially how to play, because some of these games I've never seen in my life, and besides having a moves list and training mode, I didn't have them explained. A notable one here would be something like Pocket Fighter or Gem Fighter, as it's known in different regions, where I just literally had no idea what the game wanted me to do. One other thing is that there's a quick save function in the collection, which is nice, but there's a problem. So there's only one quick save available for the whole collection. So unlike playing in a classic library on Nintendo Switch when you're playing NES games or Super NES games, you can't go into Street Fighter and quick save a state in Street Fighter and then jump to another game and then save a quick state there. When you save a quick state, it overwrites, it gives you a warning and it overwrites the quick state for the whole collection. So that's a bit of a bummer, because with some of these games I wanted to go in, get a bit of progress, especially in there's a game in here I mentioned earlier called Red Earth that's got some RPG elements. It's the kind of game where I might want to play a little bit, save, and then come back to it later. The games retain their classic graphics. There's no HD remasters or redrawn frames here. That said, it looks great and it ran great from a technical perspective. There was no problems with loading. Loading was nice and quick on both systems, and the visuals looked great as well, whether or not we were playing on a small Switch screen or up, on a big 4K TV. The classic gameplay of these games still feels great. Playing on an Xbox controller was okay, but with the Joy-Cons there was a bit of a struggle to pull off moves, and the D-pad is definitely not suited on the Switch, where it's 4 different buttons rather than one single D-pad. Nothing's ever going to beat an arcade stick when it comes to these games. They had tried to make it a little bit easier. They've given controller schemes where if you press the equivalent of your left bumper, for example, you will get the ability to, say, press down and left bumper will do a fireball, and forward and the button will do another move, just to make it a little bit easier. It works okay, but it's not perfect, so overall the controls can be a bit iffy at times. While there's offline and online multiplayer, the online multiplayer can work depending on your specific setup. If you're playing online multiplayer in the same region as yourself, you can expect a pretty good gameplay experience. But if you can't find anyone locally in your region, then you have to switch the cross-region matchmaking on. And when we tried that, the gameplay was very janky, and there was a lot of sort of speed ups and slowdowns and things. It was playable, which was commendable, but it's not ideal. Looking at the library, there are some weird omissions, but we'll get to that a little bit later. For now, let's look at what they've got. Darkstalkers titles include versions that were never available outside of Japan before, which is pretty cool. There's 5 of them in total, and these range from the Darkstalkers games to their sort of linked follow-ons and so on, such as Vampire Savior. There's a cool game called Red Earth, which is essentially a boss battle game with RPG elements where you can actually get progress and unlock items and so on with a code that lets you return to where you were, so that's pretty neat. We were mostly unfamiliar with Cyberbot's Full Metal Madness, but the Gundam-styled mech action is kind of fun and looks really cool as well. The collection also features Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo and Super Gem Fighter Minimax, and while Super Gem Fighter, also known as Pocket Fighter, won't get too many people's interest, Super Puzzle Fighter is just a great addition to this collection, and it's just such an incredible game to return to. It's such an easy game for newcomers to pick up. It was easily one of the highlights of the collection for us. Street Fighter 2 needs no introduction, but while this should be the jewel of the collection, there's an issue with this game that really disappointed us. Now, the gameplay for Street Fighter 2 stands the test of time. The multiplayer is fantastic, but the problem comes in if you want to just jump in and play some arcade mode. All the games in the collection are defaulted at a 4 out of 10 difficulty level, but for some reason in Street Fighter 2, the difficulty level is absolutely brutal in arcade mode. The computer fighters can just be so aggressive and the damage they do can be insane at times. We thought something was wrong, so we started testing out various difficulty levels and found that pretty much any difficulty level was the same. The only difference we had is when trying 0 out of 10 difficulty, and what it seemed to do was only lower the enemy's damage. And this didn't do much more for actually increasing the enjoyment value of the game. All it did is make the enemy beat up on you a lot, but with lower damage output, meaning that many of the rounds just ended in a timeout. Speaking of Street Fighter, this also brings us on to our final point and maybe our biggest criticism of the collection, the library selection. With Capcom celebrating 30 years of fighting games, it just doesn't feel right when certain titles are missing. Looking back, it feels wrong to ignore Street Fighter 1 and Street Fighter 3. It also just doesn't feel quite right to have a collection without games like Marvel vs. Capcom, Street Fighter Alpha, and X-Men Children of the Atom. In conclusion, there's a lot to like in the Capcom Fighting Collection. It just feels like it's missing some key titles that we really would have loved to see. There's a lot of features and the gameplay is still great. While we still recommend the collection for classic fighter fans and those who want to check it out, we can't help but feel that this just isn't the 35-year celebration that both Capcom and gamers deserve.